The morning sun barely touched the windows of the sprawling Harrington estate as Elena Vasquez walked up the long driveway, her worn shoes crunching on the perfectly maintained gravel. Her heart beat a little faster as she took in the mansion's imposing stone facade. This would be her workplace now, a far cry from the small apartment she shared with her elderly father. Elena paused at the massive front door, straightening her simple blouse and checking that her dark hair was neatly tied back. She needed this job desperately. The medical bills had piled up faster than she could manage, and with her father still recovering, this position as a live-in maid offered stability they couldn't afford to lose. She rang the doorbell, and the chime echoed inside like a concert hall. A moment later, an older man with a straight back and kind eyes opened the door. "You must be Elena," he said with a slight smile. "I'm Howard, the head of household staff. Come in. Mr. Harrington is not at home this morning, which makes it a good time for your orientation." Elena stepped into a foyer larger than her entire apartment, marble floors gleaming under a crystal chandelier. She tried not to stare, but everything about the place spoke of unimaginable wealth. "The staff quarters are this way," Howard said, leading her through a side passage. "You'll have your own room, small but private. Meals are taken in the staff dining room, and your schedule will be posted weekly." As they walked, Elena caught glimpses of rooms filled with expensive furniture, artwork that belonged in museums, and at one point, through double doors left slightly ajar, something that made her heart skip a beat. A magnificent grand piano, black and glossy under the natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows. She must have slowed her pace because Howard noticed her gaze. "That's the music room. Mr. Harrington doesn't use it much these days. Just dust to be done in there." Elena nodded quickly and continued following him, but her mind lingered on the piano. It had been nearly 2 years since she had touched one. 2 years since she'd had to leave the music conservatory, her scholarship meaningless in the face of her father's sudden illness and the crushing medical debt that followed. After showing Elena to her room, indeed small but clean and comfortable, Howard gave her a tour of the spaces she would be responsible for cleaning. "Mr. Harrington values his privacy above all else," Howard explained as they moved through the East Wing. "He works from home most days in his office, which you'll clean only when he's out. The West Wing is entirely his private quarters and off-limits unless specifically requested." "What's he like?" Elena asked, immediately wondering if the question was too forward. Howard's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Harrington is demanding. He expects perfection. He made his fortune in tech startups before he turned 35, and he's not yet 40. Brilliant man, but," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "not always the most patient employer." What Howard didn't say, but Elena would soon learn, was that Victor Harrington was a man haunted by his own success. His wealth had built walls around him, walls made stronger by betrayals both personal and professional, former friends who wanted money, partners who stole ideas, a fiancée who had been more interested in his bank account than his heart. All had taught him to be suspicious of everyone's motives. By afternoon, Elena had changed into the simple uniform provided, charcoal gray with a white apron, and begun her duties. She dusted shelves lined with books that appeared unread, polished silver that seemed unused, and vacuumed carpets that barely showed footprints. The house, for all its grandeur, felt unlived in, like a museum after closing hours. It was nearly 4 when the front door opened and closed with a decisive thud. Elena was dusting in the library and heard Howard's voice greeting someone, followed by a deeper voice asking quick, clipped questions. She continued working, keeping her head down as footsteps approached. "This is Elena Vasquez, sir. She started today," Howard said from the doorway. Elena turned and found herself facing Victor Harrington for the first time. He was tall with sharp features and dark hair that showed hints of early gray at the temples. His suit probably cost more than she would make in months, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, keen and assessing, the blue-gray of a winter sky and utterly devoid of warmth. "Ms. Vasquez," he said with a brief nod that barely acknowledged her existence. His gaze swept over her and then past her to the bookshelves. "The 3rd shelf has been missed." Without waiting for a response, he turned to Howard. "I'll be in my office. The Tokyo call is in 30 minutes. No interruptions." And then he was gone, leaving Elena with burning cheeks and the distinct feeling she had been found wanting. "Don't take it personally," Howard said quietly. "He's like that with everyone. The days fell into a pattern after that. Elena would rise early, complete her morning tasks, and occasionally catch glimpses of Mr. Harrington as he moved through the house like a ghost, always absorbed in work calls or staring at his laptop. He rarely spoke directly to the staff, communicating mostly through Howard or through notes left in precise handwriting. But it was the piano that kept drawing Elena's attention. During her third week, when she was assigned to clean the music room, she spent extra time there, carefully dusting the instrument without opening the lid. Her fingers itched to touch the keys to see if they felt as perfect as they looked. The room itself was beautiful, high ceilings with acoustics that would make every note sing. "Do you play?" The question made Elena jump. She hadn't heard Mr. Harrington enter, hadn't known he was even home. "No, sir," she lied, pulling her dusting cloth back. "I was just making sure I didn't miss any spots." He studied her for a moment too long, his expression unreadable. "That piano is a Steinway Model D concert grand, worth more than you'll make in a decade. I'd appreciate if you'd be particularly careful around it." "Of course, sir," Elena said, lowering her eyes. "I'll be finished in just a moment." Instead of leaving, he walked to the windows, looking out at the manicured gardens. "It was my mother's," he said unexpectedly. "She was the musician. I never had the patience for it." Elena didn't know how to respond to this sudden personal revelation, so she simply nodded and continued working. After a moment, he left without another word. But she felt as though something had shifted, as if he'd shown her a piece of himself by accident and immediately regretted it. That night in her small room, Elena opened the worn photo she kept by her bed, herself at 18, sitting at a piano on stage receiving the award that had secured her scholarship. Her father stood beside her, his face beaming with pride before the stroke that had changed everything. She traced the outline of the piano in the photo and allowed herself a moment of grief for the dream she had packed away. As weeks passed, Elena became aware that Mr. Harrington was watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with curiosity, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Several times she entered a room to find him observing her with that same calculating gaze before he would nod curtly and leave. Howard noticed too. "He's never paid this much attention to household staff before," he commented one evening as they prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Usually he barely registers we exist." "Maybe he thinks I'm doing something wrong," Elena suggested, worried. "No," Howard shook his head. "If that were the case, I'd have heard about it immediately and in great detail." The mystery was solved partly one rainy afternoon when Elena was cleaning the library. Mr. Harrington's office door was open, and she overheard him on a phone call. "Yes?" "I've verified her background," he was saying. "Conservatory dropout, scholarship student until 2 years ago. Father had a stroke. No, I don't think it's an angle. She doesn't even know I'm aware of her background." Elena froze, the duster suspended in midair. He had investigated her, known all along about her musical training? Heat rose to her face, partly embarrassment, partly anger at this invasion of her privacy. Of course, someone like him would assume everyone had ulterior motives, that she had taken the job to somehow take advantage of him, rather than simply needing to pay her father's medical bills. She finished her work quickly and avoided the office area for the rest of the day. That evening, as she walked past the music room on her way to the staff quarters, she saw the door was open, the lights off except for the moon casting silver light across the piano. Without thinking, Elena stepped inside. The house was quiet. Mr. Harrington was out at some business dinner. Howard had retired early with a headache. No one would know if she just touched the keys just once. She sat at the bench, her body remembering the posture automatically. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Just one chord, one moment to remember. Elena pressed down gently, and a perfect C major chord filled the room. The sound was so beautiful, so pure, that tears sprang to her eyes. Before she could stop herself, her left hand joined in, adding bass notes, and then she was playing. Really playing, for the first time in 2 years. A simple Bach prelude she had memorized as a child, her muscle memory carrying her through despite the long absence. When the piece ended, she sat in silence, hands resting on her lap, allowing herself to feel both the joy of playing again and the pain of everything she had lost. A soft sound from the doorway made her turn sharply. Howard stood there, a glass of water in his hand and surprise on his face. "I had no idea you could play," he said softly. "That was beautiful." Elena stood quickly, smoothing her uniform. Please don't tell Mr. Harrington. I shouldn't have touched it without permission. Howard's expression softened. Your secret is safe with me. But I wonder, he paused, why hide such a gift? Because it doesn't belong in my life anymore, Elena said simply. I'm a maid now, not a pianist. And Mr. Harrington made it very clear how valuable that piano is. What neither of them knew was that this moment was just the beginning. The music that Elena had tried so hard to lock away was about to find its way back into her life in the most unexpected way. And Victor Harrington's carefully constructed walls were about to face their first real challenge in years. 3 weeks passed, and Elena managed to avoid playing the piano again, though the temptation grew stronger each time she cleaned the music room. The memory of those few minutes at the keyboard had awakened something in her that refused to be silenced. Sometimes, alone in her room at night, she would practice silently on her bedspread, fingers moving through the motions of pieces she had once known by heart. Victor Harrington had been away on business trips more often than not, which made the atmosphere in the house lighter. Howard had become something of a friend to Elena, sharing stories of his 30 years working in wealthy households while they prepared staff meals together. Mr. Harrington isn't the worst I've seen, Howard said one evening as they washed dishes. Just the loneliest. Lonely? With all that money? Elena asked, finding it hard to imagine. Howard's hands stilled in the soapy water. Money builds very effective walls, but it's cold living behind them. His parents died within a year of each other when he was in his 20s. No siblings. Few real friends. The business partners who helped start his first company tried to push him out once it became successful. What about personal relationships? Elena asked, curious despite herself about the man who seemed to look through her rather than at her on the rare occasions they crossed paths. There was a fiancé a few years back. It ended badly. Howard didn't elaborate, but his expression suggested the story wasn't a happy one. Since then, it's just been work. The man barely sleeps. Sometimes I hear him pacing at 3 a.m. Elena thought about this as she dried the plates. In some ways, she and her employer were opposites. She had so little, but she had her father's love and the memories of a childhood filled with music and laughter. Victor Harrington had everything money could buy, but seemed to have no one who truly cared about him. This unexpected sympathy was tested the very next day, when Elena overheard Victor speaking sharply to Howard about a water spot on a bathroom mirror. His tone was cold, his words cutting, and Howard's face showed the strain of maintaining professional composure. Elena bit her lip to keep from stepping in, reminding herself that she couldn't afford to lose this job. The house needs to be perfect for tomorrow night, Victor was saying. I have important guests coming, people who could make or break this new acquisition. Everything must be flawless. The following day was a whirlwind of preparation. Extra staff were brought in to help with the dinner party. A chef and 2 assistants, additional servers, and a bartender. Elena was assigned to final cleanings and then to help serve during the event. She ironed her uniform twice to ensure not a single wrinkle remained. By 7 o'clock, the mansion gleamed like something from a magazine spread. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases in every room. The dining table set for 12 sparkled with silver and fine china. Elena stood in the kitchen with the other servers, listening as Howard gave last-minute instructions. Remember, be invisible but available. Anticipate needs before they're expressed. And whatever happens, maintain your professional demeanor. His eyes lingered on Elena for a moment longer than the others, and she wondered if he was thinking of their conversation about the piano. The guests began arriving at 7:30, men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses that probably cost more than Elena's yearly salary. From the kitchen she could hear the murmur of conversation, occasional laughter, the clink of glasses as drinks were served in the living room. At 8, they moved to the dining room, and the real work began. Elena moved efficiently between kitchen and dining room, serving plates, refilling wine glasses, removing empty dishes. The conversation flowed around her as if she weren't there. Talk of markets and acquisitions, vacation homes and private schools. Victor sat at the head of the table, perfectly at ease in this world of wealth and privilege. Elena noticed how different he seemed here, confident, occasionally even charming in a calculated way. This was a man playing a role he knew well. Victor, you've outdone yourself with this house, Kundu, said a woman with platinum blonde hair and a diamond necklace that caught the light with every movement, though I'm surprised you haven't redecorated since buying it. That music room is so old-fashioned. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Some things are worth preserving, Diane. That piano belonged to my mother. Oh, do you play? Asked another guest, a balding man with round glasses. No, Victor replied shortly. Never had the patience for it. Elena was removing a plate near the foot of the table, trying to remain invisible as Howard had instructed. Such a waste, the blonde woman continued, swirling wine in her glass, a beautiful instrument gathering dust. No offense to your mother's memory, of course. Something flashed across Victor's face, a brief crack in his composed facade. Elena recognized it as pain before it was quickly masked. She should have kept moving, should have returned to the kitchen, but she found herself pausing, watching the interaction. Victor's eyes suddenly locked with hers, catching her listening. For a moment, Elena thought she saw something unusual there. Not anger at her breach of protocol, but something more complex. Then his expression changed completely, a cold smile forming on his lips. Perhaps we could have some entertainment after dinner, he said, his gaze still fixed on Elena. You there, maid? Elena froze, 12 pairs of eyes suddenly turning to look at her. Yes, sir, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. You've been paying particular attention to my mother's piano, haven't you? I've noticed you lingering in that room. Elena's cheeks burned. The dining room had gone quiet, the guests watching with curious expressions. Howard stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his face a mask of concern. I just ensure it's properly dusted. Sir, Elena replied softly. Victor leaned back in his chair, that strange smile still playing on his lips. After dinner, I think you should play for us. Show us what you can do. The request, no, the command hung in the air. Elena felt her stomach drop, he knew. Somehow, despite her lie, despite her careful avoidance, he knew about her background. This wasn't a request for entertainment. It was a trap, a public humiliation in the making. I'm afraid I don't play, sir, she said, clinging to her earlier lie. Victor's eyebrow raised slightly. Really? That's not what your conservatory record indicates, Miss Vasquez. Full scholarship at Eastman, wasn't it? Until you dropped out 2 years ago. The room fell completely silent. Elena could feel every eye on her, could sense the mixture of curiosity and discomfort from the guests. Howard took a half-step forward as if to intervene, then stopped himself. I haven't played in years, Elena said quietly. Honestly, I wouldn't be any good now. Nonsense, Victor said dismissively. That kind of training doesn't just disappear, I insist. After dinner, you'll play for my guests. He turned away, effectively dismissing her and signaling that the matter was settled. Conversation slowly resumed around the table, though Elena could hear curious whispers following her as she retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly. He can't make you do this, Howard said in a low voice when she reached the safety of the kitchen. It's not part of your job. Elena set down the stack of plates she was carrying and took a deep breath. Yes, he can. He's the employer, and if I refuse... She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew she couldn't afford to lose this position. Why would he do this? She whispered more to herself than to Howard. Howard looked troubled. I don't know. I've never seen him act quite like this. The rest of dinner passed in a blur for Elena. She moved mechanically between kitchen and dining room, serving dessert and coffee, all while dreading what was to come. 2 years without touching a piano, except for that one stolen moment, and now she was expected to perform for a room full of judgmental, wealthy strangers. Her hands felt clumsy just thinking about it. After dinner, Victor stood and gestured toward the music room. Shall we? I've promised you a little entertainment. The guests moved into the music room, taking seats on the various chairs and sofas. The grand piano stood in the corner, lid raised, impossibly intimidating under the soft lighting. Elena stood in the doorway, her uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too obvious against the evening wear of the guests. Come in, Ms. Vasquez, Victor called, motioning her forward. His tone was pleasant, even light, but his eyes held something challenging, almost cruel. Show us what you can do. As Elena stepped reluctantly into the room, she caught different expressions on the faces of the guests. Some looked amused, some uncomfortable, others simply curious. The blonde woman, Diane, was whispering something to her companion, a smirk on her perfectly made-up face. Really, Victor, an older man said quietly. Is this necessary? The poor girl looks terrified. Nonsense, Thomas, Victor replied easily. Ms. Vasquez is a trained musician. I'm simply offering her a chance to practice her true calling, rather than dusting my shelves. His gaze found Elena again. Isn't that right? Elena said nothing as she approached the piano. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. As she sat on the bench, adjusting it slightly by muscle memory, she noticed her hands were trembling. She placed them in her lap, trying to steady them. What should she play? Her mind raced through her repertoire, trying to remember what her fingers might still manage after so long. Something simple would be safest. But that would only confirm what Victor seemed to want to prove, that she was mediocre and amateur, someone who didn't belong in the world of fine things. She looked up and found Victor watching her, that same cold challenge in his eyes. In that moment, something shifted inside Elena. The fear didn't disappear, but alongside it grew a different feeling. Defiance. He wanted to humiliate her? Fine. But she wouldn't make it easy for him. Elena straightened her back, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The room fell silent, waiting. In the doorway, Howard watched with concern etched on his kind face. No one, least of all Victor Harrington, was prepared for what would happen when Elena finally began to play. Elena's fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. The room was completely silent, every eye fixed on her. She could feel Victor's smug expectation of her failure like a physical weight. 2 years without serious practice. 2 years of buried dreams and responsibilities that had nothing to do with music. What could he possibly expect from her? With a small, almost imperceptible breath, Elena began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor filled the room. She had chosen it almost without thinking. It had been the last piece she had mastered before leaving the conservatory, the piece that had earned her the highest marks from her harshest professor. Its opening was deceptively simple, a gentle introduction that belied the technical storm to come. Elena felt rusty at first, her fingers not quite as responsive as they once had been. But as the familiar melody flowed from her hands, something awakened inside her. It was like finding an old friend she'd thought was lost forever. By the time she reached the main theme, muscle memory had taken over completely, and the music began to pour out of her. The guests, who had been exchanging awkward glances, now sat perfectly still. Diane's champagne glass was frozen halfway to her lips. The older gentleman, Thomas, leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting from pity to astonishment. But Elena noticed none of this. Her eyes had closed, shutting out the room, the mansion, her uniform, her audience. There was only the music now, the building drama of the piece, the story it told of hope and despair, of light breaking through darkness. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, navigating the complex runs and arpeggios that had once been as natural to her as breathing. When she reached the piece's passionate middle section, Elena's body swayed slightly with the music's intensity. The powerful chords resonated through the room, filling every corner with sound that seemed too big, too complete to be coming from just one instrument, one person. This was Chopin as he was meant to be played, with heart and soul and technical brilliance that made the difficult seem effortless. Howard stood transfixed in the doorway, one hand pressed to his mouth. He had known Elena was trained, but this was artistry of the highest caliber, and Victor Harrington's face had undergone a remarkable transformation. The smug smile had vanished the moment Elena began to play in earnest. Now he sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. His eyes never left Elena's hands as they danced across the keyboard, creating magic that he had never expected, never imagined when he had conceived his cruel joke. As the piece built toward its thunderous climax, Elena was no longer in the music room of a mansion. She was on stage again, playing her heart out, her father watching proudly from the front row. All the pent-up emotion of the past 2 years, the grief over her abandoned career, the struggle to care for her father, the daily humiliations of financial hardship, all of it poured through her, fingertips into the music. The final section of the ballade was a test for even seasoned concert pianists, rapid, scales and complex harmonies that required both technical precision and emotional control. Elena's lack of recent practice should have made it impossible, but the muscle memory built from thousands of hours of training carried her through. A few small imperfections crept in, a slightly blurred run here, a less than perfect trill there. but they only added humanity to the performance, making it real rather than mechanical. As she approached the final dramatic chords, Elena opened her eyes at last, suddenly remembering where she was and why she was playing. The looks on the faces of Victor's guests brought her crashing back to reality. The shock, the admiration, the open mouths and wide eyes. And Victor himself. His face had lost all color, his expression stunned beyond anything she had ever seen. The final notes resonated through the room, powerful and definitive. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Elena's hands returned to her lap, her breath coming quickly from both exertion and emotion. She waited, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable again. For several long seconds, no one moved or spoke. Then Thomas, the older gentleman, rose to his feet and began to applaud. The sound seemed to break a spell, and suddenly everyone was standing, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Diane's perfectly made-up face showed clear astonishment. A man near the back wiped discreetly at his eyes. "Extraordinary," someone murmured. "Absolutely extraordinary. Where on earth did you find her, Victor?" Another guest asked loudly. Victor didn't answer. He remained seated, his expression unreadable now that the initial shock had passed. His eyes met Elena's across the room, and in them she saw confusion, embarrassment, and something else she couldn't quite name. Elena stood from the piano bench, smoothing her uniform with hands that still trembled slightly from the emotional and physical demands of the piece. She wasn't sure what to do now. Should she say something? Leave the room? Wait for instructions? Howard saved her from the uncertainty by stepping forward. "I believe the coffee service is ready in the living room," he announced smoothly, gesturing toward the door. The guests began to move, still talking excitedly among themselves, many casting glances back at Elena as they left. "My dear, that was magnificent," Thomas said, pausing beside her. "Are you currently performing anywhere?" "I'm on the board of the Symphony Society, and we're always looking for fresh talent." Before Elena could respond, Victor stood abruptly. "I think that's enough for tonight," he said, his voice strained and oddly formal. "Ms. Vasquez has duties to attend to." Thomas looked as though he might argue, but then nodded slightly and followed the other guests out. Soon only Elena, Howard, and Victor remained in the music room. The silence was heavy with unspoken words. Howard looked between them, then quietly excused himself, leaving Elena alone with her employer. Victor turned to the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. For a long moment he said nothing, and Elena waited, her heart still racing from the performance and now from apprehension. Would he fire her for lying about her abilities? For stealing that moment of practice weeks ago? "Why did you lie?" he finally asked, still not turning to face her. "When I asked if you played," Elena took a careful breath. "I don't play anymore," she answered truthfully. "Tonight was the first time I've really played in 2 years." Now he did turn, his expression incredulous. "That's impossible. No one plays like that without regular practice." Elena gave a small, sad smile. "I used to practice 8 hours a day, every day for 15 years. Some things become part of you. Why did you stop?" The question was direct, almost demanding, but there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "My father had a stroke," she said simply. "The medical bills. There was no choice. I left school and took whatever work I could find." Something flickered across Victor's face, perhaps recognition of the cruel irony. He had meant to embarrass her by exposing her failed ambitions, but had instead revealed an extraordinary talent. "You should be on stage," he said finally, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "Not cleaning my house." Elena's chin lifted slightly.
"Yes," she agreed quietly.
"I should be. But life doesn't always give us what we should have." He looked away and she saw his jaw tighten. Was it anger? Embarrassment? She couldn't tell. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, distant. "You may go. Howard will handle the rest of the evening's duties." Elena nodded and turned to leave, emotionally drained from the performance and the confrontation. "Ms. Vasquez," Victor called when she reached the door. She paused, looking back at him. "You play remarkably well." The compliment seemed difficult for him, as if pulled from somewhere deep and rusty with disuse. "Thank you, sir," she replied softly, then left before he could see the tears that had suddenly formed in her eyes. In the hallway, Elena leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to compose herself. The evening had been a roller coaster, from humiliation to triumph to this strange, unsettled feeling. She had revealed a part of herself she had kept hidden, and she wasn't sure what the consequences would be. Howard appeared from the direction of the kitchen, concern evident in his kind eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Elena nodded, then laughed shakily. "I honestly don't know. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," Howard said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a remarkable gift, Elena." "Had," she corrected automatically. "I had a gift." Howard shook his head firmly. "No, my dear. What we all heard tonight wasn't something from the past. It's very much alive in you." From the living room came the sound of animated conversation. Elena could hear her name mentioned repeatedly, questions being asked about her background, her training. "They're quite taken with you," Howard observed. "Thomas Wellington is not a man who offers empty compliments. If he says he's interested in your talent, he means it." Elena's heart gave a painful lurch. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd learn to live without it. "It doesn't matter," she said more sharply than she intended. "I work here. I clean houses now." Howard studied her face for a moment. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully. "But after tonight, I suspect things may change." In the music room, Victor Harrington stood alone, one hand resting lightly on the piano lid. His face was troubled, his thoughts in turmoil. The evening had not gone as planned. The small, mean moment of triumph he had anticipated had transformed into something entirely different. Something that had shaken him in ways he didn't fully understand. He ran his fingers lightly over the piano keys without pressing them, remembering the way Elena's hands had moved, the music she had created. It had been beautiful, and beauty was something that had been absent from his life for a very long time. The mansion felt different the morning after Elena's performance. As she moved through her usual cleaning routine, she noticed the staff looking at her with new eyes, curious glances, small smiles, and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Word had spread quickly about what had happened in the music room. "Everyone's talking about it," Lucia, one of the kitchen staff, told her as they prepared breakfast. "They say Mr. Harrington looked like he'd seen a ghost when you started playing." Elena focused on slicing fruit, uncomfortable with the attention.
"It wasn't that dramatic." "That's not what Howard said," Lucia continued, lowering her voice.
"He said the guests wouldn't stop asking about you even after you left. That Thomas Wellington gave Mr. Harrington his card specifically for you." Before Elena could respond, Howard himself entered the kitchen. "Elena, when you've finished here, please come see me in the study." His tone gave nothing away, and Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. Was this it? Would she be let go for embarrassing her employer, for lying about her abilities? She finished her tasks mechanically, her mind racing through contingency plans. They still needed money for her father's medications. She would have to find another position immediately. When she entered the small study Howard used for household management, she was surprised to find him alone. She had half expected Victor to be there. "Please sit down," Howard said kindly, gesturing to a chair. When she was seated, he continued, "I wanted to speak with you privately about last night." Elena folded her hands in her lap. "I apologize for any embarrassment I may have caused. I understand if Mr. Harrington feels I was dishonest about my background." Howard looked genuinely surprised. "Embarrassment? My dear, you gave those people something they rarely experience in their privileged lives. A moment of true artistry. Several of them called this morning to express their admiration." "Oh," Elena said softly, unsure how to respond. "As for Mr. Harrington..." Howard paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "He's..." Processing what happened. "I've known him for 7 years and I've never seen him quite like this." "Like what?" Elena asked. Howard's expression was thoughtful, unsettled, perhaps even humbled, though he'd never admit it. He leaned forward. "Elena, I need to ask you something. Why did you hide your talent? Not just from him, but from all of us." Elena looked down at her hands. "When I left the conservatory, I packed that part of my life away. It was easier that way. Less painful." She looked up, meeting Howard's kind eyes. "And honestly, what would be the point? Who wants a maid who can play Chopin but can't pay her rent?" Howard nodded slowly. "I understand. But talent like yours doesn't just disappear because circumstances change. What you did last night was extraordinary." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. But it doesn't change anything. I still need this job. Of course, Howard assured her. Your position is secure. In fact, I've been instructed to adjust your schedule. He handed her a paper with a new weekly timetable. Your duties have been reduced by half with no reduction in pay. Elena stared at the paper in confusion. I don't understand. Mr. Harrington's instructions, Howard explained. He also said the music room is available to you during your free hours should you wish to practice. Elena's heart skipped a beat. He said that? Howard nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. His exact words were, "It's a crime to let that piano sit unused when someone with actual talent is dusting the damn thing." Elena laughed despite herself. It sounded exactly like something Victor would say. The grudging acknowledgement wrapped in gruffness. There's something else, Howard added, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. Thomas Wellington was quite insistent that you call him. He's hosting a small musical evening next month and would like you to attend. As a guest, not staff. Elena took the card, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. Thomas Wellington, Symphony Society Board Chairman. A door that had been firmly closed was suddenly cracking open. I don't know, she said, overwhelmed by the possibility. You don't have to decide now, Howard said gently. Just know that the option is there. The next few days passed in a strange new rhythm. Elena completed her reduced workload efficiently, finding herself with unexpected free time. At first, she avoided the music room, unsure if Victor's offer through Howard was genuine or if it was some new, subtle form of mockery. But on the third day, the pull became too strong. During her afternoon break, she slipped into the music room, closing the door behind her. The grand piano waited, lid already raised almost as if someone had prepared it for her. She sat on the bench, feeling both at home and like an intruder. Her fingers moved tentatively at first, playing simple scales to warm up. Then, growing bolder, she began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, letting its gentle, flowing melody fill the room. It was like reuniting with a part of herself she had forced into silence. So absorbed was she in the music that she didn't notice the door opening slightly. Didn't see Victor pause in the hallway, listening, his expression unreadable. Over the next week, Elena fell into a new routine. Mornings were for household duties. Afternoons often found her at the piano. She began bringing sheet music from her small collection at home, reacquainting herself with pieces she had once known perfectly. Her fingers grew more responsive each day, her confidence returning gradually. Victor remained distant, their paths rarely crossing. When they did encounter each other, he was formal but not unkind. He never mentioned her playing, though Elena sometimes had the distinct feeling he had been listening from somewhere in the house. It was Howard who gradually filled in the blanks for her, sharing bits of information during their conversations. His mother was a concert pianist, Howard told her one evening as they shared tea in the kitchen, quite renowned in her time. She died when he was 24. Cancer. The piano was hers, Elena said, remembering Victor's comment from weeks ago. Howard nodded. He kept very few of his parents' things when he sold their house. Just the piano and some photographs. Did he play at all? Elena asked, curious about the man who remained such an enigma. He tried as a child. His mother taught him, but he never had the patience for it by his own admission. Howard sipped his tea thoughtfully. I think that's why your playing affected him so deeply. It brought something back that he'd lost, or reminded him of something he never had, Elena suggested quietly. On the 10th day after the dinner party, Elena was practicing a particularly challenging section of a Beethoven sonata when she felt a presence in the room. She turned to find Victor standing just inside the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret. She immediately stopped playing and stood. I'm sorry I didn't hear you come in. Please don't stop on my account, he said, his voice lacking its usual edge. When she hesitated, he added, Please, continue. Cautiously, Elena sat back down and resumed playing, though she was acutely aware of his presence, making her fingers slightly less certain than before. She finished the movement and then turned to face him again, waiting. Victor walked to the window, looking out at the gardens as he had done during their first real conversation in this room. You play differently when you think no one is listening, he observed. With more freedom. It's easier to make mistakes when no one's judging them, Elena replied. Victor turned to face her. Is that what you think I'm doing? Judging, aren't you? A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps, but not in the way you imagine. He paused, then asked, why Beethoven today? The question surprised her. He wrote for the piano like he was daring it to keep up with his ideas. Even when my technique isn't perfect, his music feels alive. Victor nodded, seeming to genuinely consider her words. My mother preferred Mozart. She said he wrote with joy even in his darkest pieces. She wasn't wrong, Elena said, smiling slightly. Mozart is like sunlight. Even the shadows it creates are defined by light. Victor looked at her with new interest, as if seeing her properly for the first time. You speak about music the way she did. The comment seemed to slip out unintentionally, and he quickly changed course. Howard tells me you haven't responded to Thomas Wellington. Elena shook her head. No, I haven't. May I ask why? It's an opportunity many would envy. Elena considered her answer carefully. Because I'm not sure I can go back to that world only to leave it again. My circumstances haven't changed. My father still needs care. We still have medical bills. What if your circumstances could change? Victor asked, his tone neutral. Elena looked at him sharply. Meaning? Wellington has considerable influence. He could help arrange scholarships, performances, teaching positions. You have options beyond, he gestured vaguely. This being your house? Working for you? There was a slight edge to her voice now. Should I be looking for another position, Mr. Harrington? That's not what I meant, he said quickly, looking uncomfortable. I only meant you have talent that deserves recognition. The compliment, unexpected and seemingly sincere, caught her off guard. Thank you, she said quietly. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Victor cleared his throat. Wellington's musical evening is in 3 weeks. Should you decide to attend, you would of course have the night off. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. And Elena, the piece you played that night, the Chopin. It was my mother's favorite. With that, he was gone, leaving Elena staring after him in surprise. It was the first time he had ever used her first name. That evening, as Elena prepared for bed in her small room, she took out Thomas Wellington's card again. Something had shifted today. The wall between employer and employee had cracked just slightly, allowing a glimpse of the man behind Victor Harrington's cold exterior. Outside her window, the night was clear and star-filled. Somewhere in this same house, she knew, Victor was probably working late, alone with his thoughts. She wondered what his mother would think of what had become of her son, and of her piano, silent for so long but now filled with music again. With a decisive motion, Elena reached for her phone. It was time to call Thomas Wellington. The call to Thomas Wellington changed everything. Within days, Elena found herself caught up in a whirlwind of possibilities she had thought were forever closed to her. Thomas had been genuine in his interest, arranging for her to meet with the artistic director of the Symphony Society the very next week. Your talent is exceptional, the director had told her after listening to her play. A bit rusty from lack of practice, certainly, but the foundation is clearly there. With dedicated work, you could be performance ready within months. The offer that followed seemed almost too good to be true. A part-time position teaching piano to scholarship students, with flexible hours that would allow her to practice and perform. The salary wasn't extravagant, but combined with her reduced hours at the mansion, it would be enough to cover her father's medical expenses. Elena walked through the mansion gardens, trying to process everything that had happened. Her life had transformed so quickly that she felt almost dizzy with it all. Just weeks ago, she had been resigned to her life as a maid, her musical dreams locked away. Now those dreams were cautiously emerging again, like plants reaching for sunlight after a long winter. Lost in thought, she didn't notice Victor approaching until he was almost beside her. He was dressed more casually than she usually saw him, in slacks and a simple button-down shirt without a tie. I hear congratulations are in order, he said, falling into step beside her on the garden path. Elena glanced at him, surprised. News travels fast. Wellington called me, Victor explained. He seemed quite pleased with himself for discovering you. There was a hint of something in his voice, not quite sarcasm, but close. He's been very kind, Elena said carefully. Victor nodded, his eyes on the path ahead. He can afford to be. His family fortune allows for such generosities. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Is there something you want to say, Mr. Harrington? Victor seemed taken aback by her directness. For a moment he said nothing, then, "I apologize. That was uncalled for." He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone who usually maintained such rigid control. "I'm glad Wellington is helping you. You deserve the opportunity." The sincerity in his voice caught her by surprise. "Thank you," she said softly. They continued walking, an awkward silence between them until Victor spoke again. "Will you be leaving your position here?" The question was asked casually, but Elena sensed tension behind it. "Not immediately," she replied. "The teaching position is part-time and I'll need both incomes for now. Howard has helped me arrange a schedule that would work for both." She hesitated, then added, "If that's acceptable to you." "Of course," Victor said quickly. "Your work here has always been exemplary." They reached a stone bench overlooking a small pond. Victor gestured to it, and after a moment's hesitation, Elena sat. He remained standing, looking out over the water. "I owe you an apology," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "What I did at the dinner party was cruel. I intended to embarrass you." Elena looked up at him, taken aback by the blunt admission. "Why?" Victor's jaw tightened. "I thought you were—" He trailed off, then tried again. "I've learned to be suspicious of people's motives. When I discovered your background, I assumed you were hiding it for some purpose." "What possible purpose would that serve?" Elena asked, genuinely bewildered. Victor gave a humorless laugh. "People have tried more elaborate schemes to get close to money." He glanced at her, then away. "I've become cynical." "Yes," Elena agreed simply. "You have." His eyes met hers, and for once there was no coldness in them, only a weariness that spoke of old wounds. "When you played that night," he said quietly, "it reminded me of my mother. Not just the piece itself, but the way music transformed you. She was the same way. A different person entirely when she played." Elena remained silent, sensing there was more he needed to say. "After she died, I couldn't bear to hear the piano," Victor continued. "I kept it because it was hers, but it's been silent for years. Until you." He sat down on the bench, leaving space between them. "Hearing you play her favorite piece, it brought something back that I thought was gone." "What was that?" Elena asked softly. Victor seemed to struggle for the right words. "A reminder that beauty still exists, that not everything valuable can be measured or purchased." He looked at his hands. "Things I used to know before I built my life around accumulation and control." The vulnerability in his admission was so unexpected that Elena didn't know how to respond. This was a different man than the cold, calculating employer she had known, or thought she had known. "Your mother," she said finally. "What was she like?" A small smile touched Victor's lips, the first genuine smile Elena had ever seen from him. "Passionate, brilliant, stubborn." His eyes took on a faraway look. "She came from nothing, you know. A small town in Wisconsin, won a scholarship to Juilliard at 16. My father was studying business at Columbia when they met at one of her recitals." "They sound like they were very different," Elena observed. "They were. He was all about structure and planning." She followed her heart completely. Somehow it worked. The smile faded. "After they were gone, I think I became a caricature of my father. All business, no music." They sat in silence for a moment, the garden around them peaceful in the late afternoon light. A light breeze stirred the leaves overhead. "I have a proposition for you," Victor said suddenly, turning to face her. "I'd like to establish a scholarship fund at your former conservatory, for students like yourself who have the talent but face financial hardships." Elena blinked in surprise. "That's very generous. I'd like you to help design it," he continued, "to ensure it addresses the real needs of students in those situations. You would be compensated for your time and expertise, of course." "Why?" Elena asked, studying his face. Victor met her gaze directly. "Because talent shouldn't be silenced by circumstance, and because I have the means to change that for at least some people." He paused. "Consider it an attempt at redemption for my behavior." Elena thought about all the students she had known at the conservatory who had struggled financially, who had worked multiple jobs just to stay enrolled. A scholarship that covered living expenses as well as tuition could make all the difference. "I'd be honored to help," she said finally. Something changed in Victor's expression, a lightness she had never seen before. "Good," he said simply. "We'll start next week." As they walked back toward the house, Elena felt as though she was seeing both the mansion and its owner with new eyes. The walls Victor had built around himself were still there, but now she could see the cracks in them and the person behind them. 6 months later, Elena stood backstage at the concert hall, smoothing her hands over the simple black dress she wore, her first public performance in almost 3 years. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. 5 minutes, Ms. Vasquez, the stage manager said with an encouraging smile. Elena nodded, taking a deep breath. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the filled seats of the auditorium. Thomas Wellington had arranged for her to perform as a featured soloist with the chamber orchestra, a remarkable opportunity that still felt somewhat unreal. Her father was in the front row, looking healthier than he had in years, beaming with pride. Beside him sat Howard, who had insisted on attending despite it being his night off. And next to Howard was Victor, impeccable in a tailored suit, his expression uncharacteristically anxious. The last 6 months had transformed their relationship. Working together on the scholarship program, they had gradually developed a friendship that surprised them both. Victor had revealed himself to be thoughtful and insightful once his defenses lowered, and Elena had found her confidence growing under his genuine support. The scholarship had launched 2 months ago, already helping 5 talented students continue their education without the financial strain that had forced Elena to abandon hers. Watching it come to life had been healing for both of them. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Elena closed her eyes, centering herself. She would be playing Chopin again tonight, the ballade that had changed everything, along with a Mozart piece she had chosen in memory of Victor's mother. Her life now was a careful balance, teaching 3 days a week at the music school, performing occasionally and still working part-time at the mansion, though her role had evolved into something more like a household manager than a maid. Her father's health had improved with better care, and for the first time in years, Elena felt secure in their future. Ms. Vasquez, it's time. Elena opened her eyes and stepped onto the stage, the applause washing over her like a wave. As she took her seat at the grand piano under the bright lights, she caught Victor's eye in the audience. He gave her a small nod, and she saw in his expression everything that had changed between them. The mutual respect, the understanding, the shared appreciation for the beauty that music could bring into even the most wounded lives. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play, the music flowing from her fingers with confidence and joy. This performance wasn't just for the audience or even for herself. It was for everyone who had helped her reclaim her gift. For her father, who had sacrificed so much for her. For Howard, whose kindness had sustained her. For Thomas Wellington, who had opened doors she thought forever closed. And for Victor, who had tried to break her spirit but instead had found his own healing in her music. As the final notes of the Chopin piece faded into thunderous applause, Elena knew with certainty that this was just the beginning of her second chance, a life where music and service could exist together, where past wounds could heal, and where the most unexpected connections could lead to profound change. When she stood to acknowledge the audience's standing ovation, her eyes found Victor again. The man who had once tried to humiliate her was now on his feet, applauding with genuine pride, and something that looked remarkably like joy. Some transformations, Elena thought as she bowed, happen through music. Others happen through forgiveness. The best ones perhaps happen through both.